Hi, I'm Natalie and I'm attending Watts Atelier online program. In this video, I want to share my thoughts on the Drawing Fundamentals Part 2 course that I finished a while ago. So let's see how much I remember. In my previous video, I shared my thoughts on the first part of this course. And even though there were some challenges, I would say that everything was pretty straightforward. We learned how to sharpen a pencil, how to draw basic shapes like cubes, spheres, and things like that, and some shading. The second part, I would say that the level of complexity went up quite a bit, but we started with kind of a continuation on the forms that we did in the first part. This time there was a group of forms or a group of shapes, I would say, and the point of this exercise was to notice negative shapes. So in the source, the objects were lit and they were all casting a shadow, and we had to find all of the shapes that the shadow parts formed. And this is a very useful exercise, at least for me, because we usually don't notice things like shadows or even highlights. We only see things that are real, quote unquote, but seeing all of the shadows was useful. It's actually quite helpful when you're drawing something to kind of flip your vision and start looking at things that are between objects as opposed to just looking at the objects themselves. So this was an interesting exercise. I have printed out my feedback here that I received. So yeah, I got some feedback on the size and perspective of the shapes. They were slightly off, and yeah, there were some angles that were not perpendicular to each other. Other than that, this was an easy kind of warm up to this course. So the next exercise, we had to draw this statue, and it was, I would say, quite difficult just because of the amount of detail that we had to draw. Again, the point of this exercise wasn't even to render this correctly, even though, of course, we need to try to do our best. But the point was to kind of look at the source and try to notice kind of the value of each of their planes in the source, and decide for each of their plane, decide kind of, you know, where on their value scale that particular value was. And then if it was, you know, over the 5, then it would be, so for example, if we're looking at the scale where 1 is black and 10 is white, so 5 would be the middle, kind of the mid value, and we would have to decide if it was over 5, then we would just render it as a shade, and if it was below 5, it would just be left white. So this was a pretty useful exercise to kind of try to see and train our eyes to see the values. So yeah, I think it was pretty useful. I would just say that again, the amount of detail here was pretty. It was pretty tedious to kind of render all of these little details in the head and the hairpiece here. All of the plane shifts here on the base of the statue, and obviously their facial features as well. So yeah, if you are new to drawing and if this feels intimidating, my advice would be to not try to kind of think about, everything that you need to do, but just focus on one step at a time and say, okay, I will just work on kind of the top of the head, or this hair piece, or I will just do the bottom part of the base, and just try to focus on that. And that is obviously after you have already kind of laid in all of their major proportions, obviously. So I wouldn't start by drawing all the details top to bottom or something like this. You need to first obviously lay everything in, but then all of the little details and lines you can do just step by step. So that was my second drawing. And then the third one, this is where we were, I think that the exercise was called Building Objects with Basic Forms. And the instructor started with this still life. And I would say the one thing that I would do differently here is I would watch the demo that he did, but I wouldn't try to draw this particular one, because this is a very complex, or rather complex, at least for me, complex still life. There are a lot of objects here, and especially the angles of the objects are all different, and so it was pretty complicated. After I've done this, and I'll talk more about my struggles here, but after I finished this exercise, I discovered that they had probably 10 more references of just simple objects like a vase or something like this. And so I wish I started with the simplest shapes first. So if you haven't done this part yet, consider, instead of jumping straight into this complicated still life, look at some of the other references they have. Let me see if I have any of them printed out here. I didn't print them out, but I think they have a lot of basically vases and things like that. And do a couple of them first before you start with this one. So anyways, I just was following the videos, and in the video they did this still life, so this is what I started doing. And I was struggling quite a lot with this exercise, just because all of the objects, there wasn't any straight line or straight angle here. So obviously there are a lot of lines here, they're all straight, but all of the angles are different. This photo was taken obviously from a close distance, and it was a wide angle photo. So there's a lot of distortion in the photo, which means that nothing is straight here. So like getting all these lines correctly and all the angles was a big challenge for me. And actually this particular drawing I abandoned, so this is not my final drawing. I was struggling with this. I was trying to use some objects as a kind of a unit of measurement. So for example, I was trying to use the book and use the length of the book to get the length or the height of the hourglass. But then I realized that the book size, I didn't get it right, so then my hourglass was wrong. And so, ultimately I think I took a photo of the drawing at this stage compared to the source, and noticed that there was just so many things that were wrong. This is the source actually. So my kettle was too big. This kind of a little table, or I don't know exactly what that is too small. Here it's much bigger. The angles were incorrect. Here this angle is way, it kind of stands out way more. And so, yeah, I decided to abandon it. And all of their angles, they were kind of driving me crazy. And so in my second attempt, I used my scale tool to get all the sizes correctly. So I made sure to kind of compare the sizes and, checking everything before I continued. So for example, you can check the height of the hourglass and make sure that it's correct. And again, I'm not sure if this is approved or not to use this tool. I spoke about this in my previous video. And so the bottom line is I don't use it to kind of plot their objects on the paper. I use it to check my proportions and sizes after I've tried to do it, by hand. So using the tool, I managed to get everything right. And again, maybe I was trying to be to make it too perfect. I don't know how much effort we were supposed to put into this, but yeah, this time I was more happy with the proportions and the sizes. And yeah, this is the completed version that got approved. So, and of course, even though you get your pass grade, you still get valuable feedback. So here let's see. So they say that proportions and shapes, they were looking good in general, and especially the teapot. It was more rendered just because their instructor rendered the teapot, so I did the same. So yeah, the one of the things that they pointed out was the angle of this teapot, and obviously it's leaning to the right. It does the same thing in the source. Maybe mine is leaning a little bit more. So I am not sure if I was supposed to correct for the distortion of the camera, and this is one of their kind of drawbacks of the way they have set up this course, is that you get one round of feedback and you cannot ask follow-up questions. So it's up to it's up to whoever is grading your drawings to explain it the best they can, and then if something is unclear, then that's it, you're kind of out of luck. So again, one thing that they talk about is that as an artist, you kind of draw what you see, and at the same time you draw what you know should be there, even if you don't see it. And also you can add or change things based on what you think should be there. So basically 3 things. And in this exercise, I was trying to basically draw what I was seeing. And so if the kettle was tilted because of the weird camera angle, I'm not sure if I should have corrected it in my rendering, and if that's what their feedback was about. Maybe, I'm not sure. Again, one thing that is a little bit tricky here is that when you're watching the video from the instructor is obviously using a live, he was drawing from a live setup of this, and then they took a photo of it, and this is the reference that we have. And so the photo will never be looking exactly as the real thing, as the real still life. And so he was not drawing things exactly in the same way. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what this feedback meant. You know, if I should have corrected the angle, because obviously in real life the kettle would probably be straight. Let's see, I also got some feedback on the hourglass that is too short and the stand is too short. And again, I wish I could ask a follow-up, because I literally use my scale tool, so it definitely is pretty close to the source. So I'm not sure exactly what they meant by it being too short. But yeah, let's see what else. Improving edge work. Yeah, I'm getting quite a lot of feedback on edges, and I'm not quite sure what they mean, to be honest. I'm not sure if my lines are too thick, or don't know. Again, I try not to worry too much about things that I don't understand, because it will probably come back again, and you know, I'll figure it out. So that was that. Again, if you're in this stage of the program, I advise to do one of the simpler shapes or objects. So this is one that I did from the sources that they provide. Again, it's just a kind of a simpler vase, and it's only one, and you don't have to worry about how the objects relate to each other. Yeah, this one, there were some issues with the sizing and the angles and things like that. But one piece of feedback I received that was quite interesting was that some of the shading should have been darker, even though it didn't show up in their source. So the grader actually mentioned that, okay, it doesn't show up in the source, but because we know that the light is coming from here and this part is supposed to be in deeper shadow, we should be adding more shadow, even though we don't see it. So that was an interesting piece of feedback, and it kind of strengthens my theory in the previous one, that maybe we should be correcting for things that we don't see in the source. So maybe the photo doesn't show the shade, but we, as an artist, we know that it should be there, and so this is why we should be adding that. So this one obviously was easier to do than the previous one. And the last exercise, we did some, let me see what it's called, contour lines. This is not my drawing. This is the instructor's drawing. The point of the exercise was to trace on the drawing. So actually, so to be able to trace, you obviously need to have what, you know, the source of what to trace. So I started by printing out the source, but the arm that we were supposed to be tracing was a little bit too small for my liking, so I actually used the projector and just kind of traced the source first. So this was pretty fun to do, but this was not part of the exercise. So we had to trace two versions, one where we kind of focused on plane shifts, and another one where we were trying to do kind of a topography lines. Yeah, this was interesting as well, quite useful, I would say, trying to see, you know, the three-dimensional shapes. And for me, kind of a useful way of thinking about this was to imagine this as an actual topo map. Like when you look at the map and you select to see their, what's it called, the terrain or something, and you kind of see all the, you know, hills and valleys in the terrain. So yeah, and trying to kind of see where the hill starts or where the valley starts, and seeing the lines that kind of separate them. So yeah, this was, I would say, probably the easiest of all of the exercises. I didn't actually have to draw anything, so just tracing. And yeah, this was approved as well. Let's see if I got any feedback on this. Nope, looks like I'm understanding the concept. So yeah, that was everything that I did in this course. I enjoyed this course, I would say. And again, if I had to do it again, I would definitely practice on the simpler shapes before jumping into the more complicated, still life. And I think I need to be correcting for, distortions in photos. I think that's probably the takeaway that I will take away from this, from the feedback that I received, and we'll find out if that's correct or not. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.